Welcome to episode 12 of Kerusi Panas, the series that looks at hot seats across Malaysia in the coming state elections that are just days away. I'm Bridget Welsh. I've driven from Kota Baru all the way down past Kuala Terengganu to the area of Kemaman. Kemaman is the southernmost part of Terengganu, which for those of us driving down the coast, it's a long drive. I've come to Kemaman because Kemaman is one of two areas, besides Telemong, which was in Ulu Terengganu, that I believe are relatively competitive in Terengganu. The first of which are seats around Besut, seats like Cukai or Ulu Besut. And the other sets of seats are in this particular district of Kemaman, and that's the seats of Kejal and Cukai. Kejal is being contested by the head of UMNO in the state, the former chief minister, Menteri Besar, a man called Ahmad Said. Ahmad Said is contesting in the seat of Kejal, which is also in Kemaman, and it is a competitive seat. But right next to him is another seat that is called Cukai, or taxes in Malay, that has always been historically very competitive. This is a seat that was created way back in 1959, and we see a history of this seat moving between UMNO and PAS, with, of course, PAS having and retained this seat for the last two terms since 2013, and it's actually the incumbent is going again for a third term. UMNO is hoping that it will be able to win this seat, in particular relying on the 13% of Chinese voters in this area. The seat is largely a Malay seat of 85% Malay community, and the rest Chinese and a few other communities as well, 1% Indians. It is seen as competitive. Part of it is because the candidate, a man called Haji Hanafia, his full name is Hanafia bin Mat Haji Hanafia Bant, at 64, he has a bit of controversy. He was the person who was seen to be making fun of the Rama Rim menu, and this created a bit of debates on social media. And of course, in 2021, he actually was fined for leaving his house during the MCO. The reason he was doing that was to give money for orphans and others, and he paid the fine. But he's been in the news in that context and has a profile. He's been part of the past government. In particular, he's been the chairman of the Welfare and Women and Family Development and National Unity Committee in the State Assembly. And he's been very active and has a tremendous active following on TikTok with 83,000 followers. And he's actually extremely popular, especially on TikTok. But part of why, because of his controversy, he's had a background of working in a whole series of companies. So he's part of what I call the green machine of PAS that has actually established itself in the state governments, both in Terengganu and in Kelantan. And he is seen as someone who is a favorite to win in this seat of Cukai. The person who's contesting against him is a man called Muhammad Rahim bin Hussein, also older at 65, a businessman, the CEO of Tulang Desmaji and Bahad. He's been formerly the head of UMNO Kemaman division. So these two men are facing off in a straight fight in this place that is very bustling. The southern part of Terengganu is where a lot of the wealth and business is. And so you can see a vibrant fishing industry, and of course the oil and gas sector is located not too far from here in Cukai. So you can see it's a very dynamic place, full of a lot more professionals, people who have higher levels of education than other parts of the state, perhaps with the exception of Kuala Terengganu. And so you see a situation where this is a very interesting, diverse place. Cukai is a very beautiful place. By the river, you see the beauty of the sea. It's a relaxing small town, like many other coastal towns, but it has this kind of deep-seated sense of community, similar to Kuala Baru. Good restaurants, lovely seafood. It has tremendous charm. Historically, Cukai was created in the 1920s, and it was like Kuala Kedah, a place that was near the river mouth. In this case, it's the Cukai River, or the Sungai Cukai. It's interesting because it was historically created as a kind of administrative center. Originally a place where the British established their base on the East Coast, in Terengganu. Subsequently, it also became a core center for UMNO. In the middle of the town, there's this empty white building that towers over everyone, over everything. I asked people, what's this building? Why does it have trees growing from it? And why is it in a position where it's not functional, especially given its pivotal place in the town? And I was struck by the fact that this building used to be an UMNO building, but there was not enough funds to maintain it and to sustain it, so they set up another smaller building, and this building has become defunct. In many ways, this symbol of this white building really speaks to the kind of questions that come up when you talk to people on the ground in Cukai. In a sense that UMNO is now an empty building, and it is no longer functional compared to the way it is the past. The seat of Cukai provides three interesting points of insight from a perspective of listening and talking to voters on the ground. The first of which is that they're very well aware of the infighting within UMNO. We've talked about infighting among different parties, especially those that have been in power for a long time. But if there's one state that has been impacted by UMNO infighting very openly, leading to changes of Menteri Besars, that has been Terengganu. And that infighting really does impact the campaign because there isn't that cohesiveness. So the differences among different players really affects the party machinery. And at the same time, it doesn't give that cohesiveness to the battle in terms of the campaign. But what has also been interesting about Cukai and the area of Kemaman more broadly is that this is a place where UMNO really believes that they're fighting to take back the state. So the UMNO Gentra that I spoke to have a lot of confidence, in part because that confidence comes from their leader, Ahmed Said, who is very prominent in this particular area. He's an established figure, not only as a former Menteri Besar, but also as someone who is kind of defined and captured what UMNO means. In this campaign in Terengganu, he's actually led the charge and arguably I would suggest being the most assertive, even aggressive, in terms of his campaign strategy of all the UMNO campaigns nationally. You see people with the fist held high, an appeal to try to come back and win back the fighting spirit. In that new building in UMNO, there's a huge picture of Ahmed Said on the wall. I went to take a look at it and to take a picture, and I had a very interesting nonverbal conversation with people who were sitting in a restaurant nearby, and I pointed to the picture, and they looked at me and they nodded their head, no. And then the next person nodded their head, no. And what was interesting is that the no's kept going around at people in the restaurant. And this wasn't a posh restaurant. This was an ordinary restaurant of many different people from different political perspectives. I just nodded and smiled, getting the nonverbal acknowledgement that this particular leader in UMNO didn't have that support on the ground like the past. And this is the issue. For UMNO, there is this sense of being in the past and living in the past in a very different type of Malaysia. There is a very different circumstances for the party. The younger voters I spoke to in Cukai reiterated what we heard multiple times in the fieldwork so far, is that younger people are looking to something different. They don't want that kind of fighter politics. They want politics that is focused on policy solutions. And they don't want people that are fighting among themselves. They'd rather have people who are fighting for the people. This issue of spirit and fighting spirit also came up in other conversations I had in Cukai. One of the things that people underestimate in what's happening in the rise of neo-Malay ethno-nationalism, which really underscores Perikatan Nasional support, which is this combination of race and religion, it also has this kind of vision for a different kind of Malay empowerment. And it's interesting, in a place where that was the center of British colonialism in Terengganu, we also see a situation where it's also now becoming a center of anti-colonial and anti-other sentiments. So it's not just about the West, it's also about other communities. The young people that talked about this talked about the sense of having a new nation, a different type of power construct, which put Malays as the overwhelmingly dominant force, fighting against outsiders, fighting against the West, and at the same time, fighting against and separating itself from the past. UMNO was seen as an extension of the colonial powers, a product of the way colonialism ended in Malaysia. In this neo-Malay nationalist rhetoric, what we're seeing is a cutoff from that into something new. Now, how real this is substantively is something very different, but it's about perceptions and the perceptions of the voters and how they see this particular struggle as being something that is actually a very empowering force. So when little labels like PN Best become to resonate among young people, they do so where they carry a different sense of spirit. And that word spirit came up again when I was having a chat with a lady shopkeeper and we were discussing what she felt was going to happen. She said both candidates have positive and negative things about them, but she said the candidates don't matter. It's all about the spirit. And PAS has the spirit now. And then she looked at me and she said, why is it that young people are so impatient, that they want something so quickly? These answers to these questions are not easy, but it indicates a sense of the dominance of the thinking that even among Chinese voters, there's a recognition that PAS is going to win in a seat like Cukai, which on the numbers looks very competitive based on voting patterns and history. But the spirit and the winds have changed in this particular place. A new political rhetoric that combines religion with a sense of national identity really speaks to the kind of broad shifts that are taking place across the country, of which Terengganu represents. But there are other things about Terengganu which makes it a less competitive place than the past, and that is that the state government remains highly popular. It's not the year 1999 where Mokhtar, at the time the chief minister, really empowered and galvanized opposition. There is no spirit of opposition against the state government. And in this place, where the white building stands, it looks very much that UMNO is going to face some very significant struggles. Its leader in the state has a good prospect of losing in the place of Kijal. Another member, and a prominent member in UMNO, Muhammad Rahim bin Hussein, who was the former deputy, also faces the prospect of losing. That white building is increasingly becoming more empty. It remains to be seen that if what happens to UMNO here leads to them losing all the seats in the state. The places of Telemong, Kemaman, Besut increasingly favor PAS winning. There's still a few days left, and the fight is going on. But Terengganu and Kemaman are very much reflective of the need for the party to rejuvenate, to expand, and to develop more coherence, not with past leaders, but leaders for the future. Thanks for joining me on this episode. We have just a couple more to go. I hope you can listen in.